Hello my fellow maker. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a pair of these beautiful Sanctity slippers. The whole idea behind this design is to render the home as a kind of sacred space. You know that feeling when you come in from the outside, take off your shoes and put on something cozy? These slippers are all about marking and celebrating that everyday moment, leaving the outside world behind and stepping into the comfort of your own personal space. They're not just practical, they're symbolic too. They help you to slow down, feel the changes in seasons underfoot, and settle into the comfort of home. And yes, they're designed to be incredibly comfortable, but also they're a great little scrap-busting project. Alright, let's go over how we'll put these slippers together. We're going to construct the Sanctity slippers in 3 parts: the slipper uppers, the upper soles, and the undersoles. Each of these sections are made separately first. Then we bring them together with a bit of basting and finish everything off with some beautiful bias binding. So the design incorporates the techniques of machine quilting, hand stitching, and as mentioned, bias binding. But before we get deep into the construction process, we need to discuss fabric choices and considerations. This design works best with light to medium weight woven fabrics. It's perfect for using up those leftover fabric scraps from past projects. Just patch them together to create a really lovely, unique colour blocked effect. It's a chance to get creative and sustainable at the same time. Alternatively, you can also upcycle existing textiles, like I've done here with this pair. They're made from a scarf that my friend found for me in a thrift shop. Apart from scarves, you might also consider other domestic textiles like old bed linen, or maybe even a soft shirt that you no longer wear. Apart from the aesthetic considerations, you also need to consider the practical and the sensorial properties of your fabrics, as they're going to be in contact with your home and your body. Now, because you'll probably be wearing these slippers daily, you want to make sure that the sole is nice and durable, and that includes both the quilt top that will be against the foot and the sole backing that's going to be in contact with the floor. Fabrics like drill, denim or canvas are great options for the sole backing, and I guess more durable woven fabrics like quilters, quilting cotton, cotton poplin and linens are really good for the quilt top or the upper sole. And when it comes to the upper part of the slipper, this is where you can bring those soft, delicate fabrics like little pieces of silk or lightweight cotton. These won't get as much wear, so you can use your more luxurious scraps here to make the slipper feel really soft against your skin. In this tutorial, I'm going to make my slippers in 2 different red fabrics to create a sort of textural contrast. The first is a red linen left over from my fabric napkins that I made for Christmas this past year, and the second is a cotton viscose sateen that was given to me by an old work colleague when she was decluttering her fabric stash. For the sole backing, I'm going to use this cotton canvas, and I'm going to cut my bias binding in this bright navy cotton to create a contrast with the red. You will also need some general purpose thread, and I like to use a top stitching thread on the top side of the machine quilting to really make those stitching lines accentuated and pop. You might notice here that I'm not matching the color of my thread to the color of my fabric, and this is because I personally really enjoy contrasts in colors. But you can choose whatever suits your color preferences. Whatever fabrication that you choose for your slippers, you will also need wadding in the center of the quilted panels. I recommend using a natural fiber wadding so that your feet can breathe. Using a lightweight wadding allows you to build up warmth and structure as needed by using multiple layers within the quilt sandwich. Additionally, the soles need further structure, so you'll also need some 3mm felt that will be used internally within the sole of the slipper. One final tip that I want to share with you is when you're cutting out the quilt backing for the slipper uppers, try to use a single piece of fabric. Avoid seams here if you can. If both the front and back have patchwork seams, it can kind of mess with your machine quilting accuracy a little bit. To make this design, you will also need the following tools and equipment: fabric scissors, snips or other small sharp scissors, a hand sewing needle, pins and sewing clips, a pen or fabric marker, a 25mm bias binding maker, a basic sewing machine, and an iron and ironing board. Additionally, if you do have a rotary cutter, a cutting mat, and a metal ruler, these things are very handy for cutting the bias binding accurately and with speed. If you don't have them, don't worry, you can just use your fabric scissors carefully to cut the binding. If you're using an upcycled textile for your quilt tops, you can skip ahead to step 2, which is time-stamped in this video. All you need to do is cut quilt tops out of your textile for both the slipper uppers and the upper soles, and you're good to go. But if you're piecing your quilt top together from scraps, like I'm going to do, this is where you get to be creative. There's no set pattern here, so use whatever scraps you have available. I usually like to mix about 2 to 3 fabrics together to create a simple colour palette, but feel free to use as many as you would like. So the basic approach is to begin by joining similar size pieces together with straight seams. Once they're joined, you want to trim off any rough edges to be straight before joining on a new scrap. And you just need to keep working in this way until your patchwork is big enough to cover the pattern pieces for both the slipper uppers and your upper soles. Make sure to press your seams open as you're working to create a quilt top that sits as flat as possible. Now it's time to make your quilt sandwich for the slipper uppers. Lay your quilt backing right side down on your table. On top of that, add 2 layers of the wadding. Then, place your quilt top over that, with the seam allowances facing down towards the wadding. You will need to secure the layers with a few pins and clips. I normally position the pins over a vertical seam line if there is one, or sometimes I'll just fold the panel in half to give myself a rough center line. With the quilt top facing up, start machine quilting from the center. Work in rows, alternating directions as you go. So you'll basically be snaking backwards and forth across the panel. There's no strict stitch pattern here, it's just ideally you're trying to keep it consistent spacing. But really here you can experiment with any stitch pattern that you would like. You could consider diamonds, wavy lines, possibly unevenly spaced straight lines. It's really up to you and your creativity. Once it's quilted, lay your slipper upper template on top and trace around it. Pen is fine here because these edges will end up being hidden in the binding. Then, machine baste 2 millimeters inside that line to hold all the quilting in place. Once complete, cut along the trace line, and then that's it. Your slipper upper is ready to go. And you will just need to complete those steps for the remaining slipper upper panel. Machine quilting the upper soles is a little simpler than what you've just completed with the slipper uppers, as there's no quilt backing needed. And this is because we're going to be using that internal felt layer and the sturdier sole backing fabric instead on the underside of this panel. Start by placing 2 layers of wadding on your table, then your sole quilt top on top of that, again with the seams facing inwards towards the wadding. Pin and clip everything to secure the layers together. Just like before, You're going to want to start your machine quilting from the center of the panel and work outwards, alternating the directions of your stitching lines as you go. Once you've completed the quilting, take the sole pattern and place it on top of the panel and trace around the edge. Then, machine baste 2 millimeters inside the line. Once complete, cut along the trace line, and there you have one upper sole. And you'll just need to repeat those steps for the remaining upper sole panel. Next, we're going to move on to making the undersoles. Take your felt and place it right side down. Layer your sole backing fabric on top of that and clip them together. Machine baste around all the edges 5 millimeters in. I find if you sew with the felt facing up, there's less slippage between the layers. Once again, trace the sole pattern onto this panel. And then machine baste 2 millimeters in from the trace line. Cut along the trace line through all layers, and this gives you your undersole. So you'll just need to repeat those steps to complete the remaining undersole panel. Cut a strip of single fold binding a little longer than the top edge of your slipper. You need to align the edges with the right sides of your fabric and the right sides of your binding together. And you want to be sewing along that first fold line in the binding, which is about 1 centimeter in from the edge. Make sure you reinforce the beginning and the end of the seam. Then press the binding over to the back, just past the stitching line, about 1.5 millimeters. And then you want to clip it in place. You will need to top stitch from the front, sewing 1 millimeter in from the inner edge of the binding. You can try using an edge stitching foot to improve your overall level of accuracy. To complete your slipper upper, trim off any excess binding flush with the edge. And you will just need to repeat these steps for the remaining slipper upper. Match up the notches around the toe of the slipper upper with the upper sole and then clip them together. There's a little bit of ease in this seam, so if it does feel a little bit fiddly, try hand basting it first with a long running stitch instead of using the clips. Moving to the machine, stitch the upper to the sole using a 5 millimeter seam allowance, and don't forget to reinforce at the start and end of the seam. You'll want to repeat these steps for the remaining slipper. Okay, we're on to the final stage of construction. This step finishes the slipper edges and joins everything together. It takes a little bit of time, but trust me, it gives the best finish. Start by folding and pressing your binding around the curves of the slipper, with the folded edge facing out. clip it in place, leaving a little bit of extra length along one side of your slipper. Unfold the binding and clip it to the slipper with the right sides facing. Stitch it down along the first fold line. This should be a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now you're going to want to leave a gap in this stitching line for now of about 5 to 7 centimetres or 2.5 inches. To join the ends of the binding, find the centre of each long tail and mark them with pins. Clip the sole out of the way and align the pins, matching the right sides of the binding together. Sew the join in the binding loop at a right angle to the binding edge. Check that the binding lays flat before trimming off the excess seam allowances. Now all you need to do is stitch across the gap to close the binding loop. Next, match the undersole to the slipper and clip them in place, aligning all the notches. The felt and the wadding layers should be touching each other at this stage. Use a whip stitch to attach the undersole to the rest of the slipper all the way around the edge. This line of stitching will be internal, so you don't need to worry too much if your stitches are not totally even. It's really just to unite the two sections of the slipper and the sole together. Work your stitches from the back through to the front, working towards yourself so as to not get your thread twisted as you're stitching. Next, you'll top stitch the binding from the top of the slipper, sewing through all of the layers. Then, press the binding to the underside of the slipper and clip it in place. To finish, use a ladder stitch to hand sew the binding closed. You'll alternate your stitches between the folded edge of the binding and the sole backing fabric. Try to make your stitches no more than 3 to 5 millimeters in length, and this is really to increase the strength and durability of your slipper and stitching. Repeat the process for the remaining slipper, and that's it. You're done. Your Sanctity slippers are complete. Thanks for sewing along with me, and until I see you in the next one, create with care, imagine with intention, and make lovingly for longevity.